I'm excited today to introduce our Career Connection speaker and College of Social Work alumnus, Tish Guerin. Graduated Tish Forney in 2010. Since 2013, she's been the founder and president of Transitions Management Group, a Charlotte, North Carolina-based consulting firm specializing in helping individuals with behavioral and mental health issues. This past September, however, she began working for the Carolina Panthers as their Director of Player Wellness. And this is the part that's really cool, I think. She's the first in-house mental health clinician for an NFL team. And that's a South Carolina alumnus who gets to do that. So, cool. Please join me in welcoming Tish.
Thank you all. Good afternoon. What time is it? Yes, good afternoon. Thank you all for having me. I'm super excited to be here. So this is going to be incredibly informal. This is not going to be death by PowerPoint. I brought no slides. So I literally came here to just speak to you about my journey and kind of what got me where I am right now. So first starting off, why social work? So I was someone that went into undergrad not changing my major at all. I knew exactly what I wanted to be from a very early age. I kind of always had this vision of, me with a notepad, sitting, someone laying on my couch with their feet up and telling me all their business. That's kind of what I thought I was going to do, right? And that is literally what I do. So I knew that very early on, so I went to Winston-Salem State University for undergrad, and I got my bachelor's in psychology and a minor in sociology. After that, however, I started to work, first, graduated, 4 years, no summer school. I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I didn't change my major at all. As soon as I walked across the stage, I moved right back to Charlotte. I did not, my car was already packed. And I was like, I'm gonna go save the world. I'm gonna be a social worker. Okay, so that was my plan anyway. So when I graduated, I got a job working with Levine Homes for Children. That was my first job out of undergrad, and what I did there was basically case management, but I worked a lot with the youth that were either in DSS custody because their parents weren't necessarily doing what they were supposed to do. So they were basically staying in this group home of sorts. Some of them had a lot of mental health challenges, some of them just needed a place to stay, so I worked with them. And that was really cool. That was cool for about a year and a half. And then I realized, okay, this place is kind of getting a little bit too much for me, and I had greater ambition. So I was like, you know what, I'm gonna try to move to a different unit. So I moved to the in-home side of the unit where they had more behavioral issues. I kind of felt like I wanted a little bit more of a challenge. I wanted to work in mental health. So when I moved to that side of the unit, again, I was not prepared at the amount of, how to put this, resistance that I was going to get, not only from the children, but from people who looked like me, but maybe didn't have my education and they didn't have a college degree. So to them, I was looked at as a threat. So a lot of work and things that I was doing would get sabotaged. I would get kind of bullied at meetings. And in my mind, I'm like, oh my goodness, we're all adults and this is not what I thought this was gonna be like. So and definitely full disclaimer, my journey has been, I'm not gonna say long, but it's been different. And not so different from a lot of other people that get into the field of social work, but it was very eye-opening in terms of things that I encountered that I just didn't expect. So this is really gonna be a full disclosure type of conversation, okay? Completely unfiltered. You guys said I could be unfiltered, right? Okay. Awesome. So I went there and I stayed with Elon on the foster care side for about another year and some change, and then I decided to go to a PRTF. Everyone know what a PRTF is? Okay. A PRTF is a psychiatric residential treatment facility for youth. So these are youth that have essentially SPMI, severe and persistent mental illness of sorts, kind of disorder. They, abuse other children. They microwaved animals. They abuse animals and or people or siblings. So these are children that have essentially kind of gone beyond what an outpatient therapist can do, and they require 24/7 treatment as well as a locked unit. So I was like, that's the challenge for me, that's where I'm gonna go, right? And I was there for a while, even actually was like part-time. So another thing is, just as in social work field, we don't get paid a whole lot. So it's just not uncommon for you to have to work 2 jobs. And after post-undergrad, I worked 2 jobs for as long as I can remember, literally probably up until like recently. I've always had like multiple incomes. I'll get to that later. So I worked at the Keys of Carolina, and that was the name of the PRTF, and that was interesting. That was really, I think, my first real eye-opening experience to what mental health can really look like in individuals. It's one thing to kind of read, the DSM-4 TR at the time. Now the DSM-5 is one thing to read those diagnoses. It's another thing to actually see it and see what it looks like in individuals. And if you've never been in a mental health facility, it is very much real. They're not made up. These diagnoses are factual, and it's interesting to kind of see them play out. So I was there, but the hours were very long. And the turnover was very, very high in this particular facility. 12-hour shifts were pretty much mandatory, and then you might have every 6 months you lose like half the staff. People would not show up to work because they were burned out, so which means you might be out of ratio at times, dealing with or working with children, adolescents, and if they are violent, that could become a little scary. So again, phase 2, I realized that was not for me either. So at that point, I was like, you know what? I'm going to try substance abuse. So I went to work at McLeod Addictive Disease Center as a substance abuse intake counselor. So when I got hired there, I really enjoyed it. I got a pay bump. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is going to be awesome. And you guys feel free to eat. I'm like, this is going to be awesome. I went from making $28,000 to $32,000. I'm rolling. This is great. As long as I had an increase, I was like, oh, this is going to be awesome. But I was still working at the McLeod Center, and I would still do PRN at the Keys of Carolina because, as I said, social workers don't always get paid a lot of money. So I had to kind of supplement my income. So I worked at the McLeod Center for, I think again, that was about 2 years. FYI, 2 years is going to be the key in this whole conversation. So I worked there and I learned a lot. But that was my first instance where I truly encountered racism. I had never really experienced it before. I couldn't have really told you what it looked like when people would have conversations with me and say, hey, they're not just trying to hold you back. They mean well. I tried to give them credit, and at this time I couldn't. So at McLeod Center, it was about 7 of us that did intakes. So which means clients would come in who were on drugs or trying to get into recovery, and they were basically requesting treatment. So I would do the clinical assessments to see what type of treatment they would need to go into, whether that's outpatient, SAIOP, adolescent SAIOP. And I'm sorry, when I use these acronyms, do you guys know what I'm saying? Okay, all right. So SAIOP is like substance abuse intensive outpatient, so which means where if you're in a regular outpatient setting, you might see or might receive treatment 1 time a week. At an SAIOP treatment, you're going to receive treatment about 3 to 6 times per week. So all of these individuals were on heavy narcotics, whether they were on alcohol dependence, they were on opioid dependence. At the time, McLeod, they were doing methadone treatment. So these were individuals that were on heroin, trying to get off heroin, or on high doses of opioids through illegal means, and they're trying to get off. So I worked with that population, and I enjoyed working with the population. However, what I realized was I got to a point where I was suffering from compassion fatigue. Does anyone know what that is? You nodded. What is compassion fatigue? Oh, yes. Yeah, this is going to be interactive. Okay.
much you're hearing somebody's issue all the time, but you kind of get tired of hearing it over and over again because you think in your mind, "Man, I can not get over it."
Correct. So this was about 2007 for me. And I remember sitting in my office and I'm speaking with a client, and she's telling me this horrid story about how she's trying to get off drugs, she wants her kids back. Her family would not take her in because she's burned so many bridges. And I was like, oh my God, this is horrible. I can't believe they won't take you in. Like, I was becoming very emotional. And I realized that when I would go home at night that I was taking a lot of that with me. I was having trouble disconnecting, disassociating from their issues and not making their issues mine. So again, that started, something that I kind of had to work through in that period because I couldn't cut it off. Because I'm a social worker, we're supposed to care, we're supposed to be, humane and, want to help people. And I didn't know how to help this lady anymore. Like, I was literally like trying to call people and say, hey, you have any space, calling shelters and all those kind of things was what you do. But I was doing a little bit more than what I was supposed to be doing in that situation. So I continued to work, there, and at that time at McLeod, we started to see a lot of turnover in my department, particularly all the people of color left. So I was the only one, and it was about only person of color, and the rest of my colleagues were all Caucasian, male and female. I decided that I had been there long enough. I had proven myself. I was very, ambitious. I was innovative. I solved a lot of problems for our department. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to try to move up into a different role, So I had been training someone that had just came in. She had only been there about 3 or 4 months. And I was just, kind of training her on kind of like what to do. It was the front desk work, how she needs to answer calls, how she needed to, plan and facilitate urine drug screenings and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, you know what, I'm going to apply for the director role of admissions. So I applied. I was super, overqualified actually. And I was like, you know what, I put in my time. This should be, super easy, no brainer. They're going to hire me. So I applied, and essentially I was blackballed. I was told that, that just wouldn't be the right role for me. I wouldn't be a good fit. They really couldn't give me any reason. And then I applied for another counselor position for methadone treatment, and the same thing happened. No, they actually canceled my interview the night before. I was called and told that my interview was canceled and not to show up. And they didn't tell the department that they had canceled my interview. This was like my manager, supervisor at the time. And so I didn't show up to the interview until like 6:30 that morning because the methadone treatment starts incredibly early. And so I didn't apply for the job. And so I kind of tried to move on. And the person that I was training that I mentioned, who had been there about 6 months, she was in active recovery. Meaning she had to blow into this contraption to basically get her car to start. And she had been there, like I said, about 6 months, and she had only had a GED. And she got the director role. But I trained her. I had a bachelor's degree, I was super innovative, and she came to me for everything and I would help. But she was Caucasian. And at this time, it was Obama and McCain, so we had a lot of, red hat wearing individuals, at the time. So I was like, okay, they are really, really discriminating against me. Like, there's no way I'm going to be able to do anything different in this role. And I tell you that story because when you graduate, I don't necessarily feel like I had as much information on what the working field was going to be like once I finished school. So that's why I like doing these kind of talks, to really kind of let you know, not to scare you. I'm not going to scare you. But really just to inform you of things that you really do need to be kind of cognizant of. So I decided, you know what? That's okay. They're not going to let me flourish here. I'm not going to be able to do anything more than what I'm doing right now. And that's where they want to keep me, at $32,000, and that's okay. So I kind of had an aha moment. And I remember I was in my office and I was crying. And one of the last black coworkers that I had came in and she was like, Tish, what's wrong? I was like, you know what? I'm trying trying to do better, I want to do more, and they're just not going to let me do that here. So I was like, I think I need to go to school. I'm going to go back to school where I just cannot be denied if I get more education. And at the time, I had applied to UNCC, UNC Charlotte, and I had taken the GRE, but I wasn't a really great tester. You know, I just didn't do great at like the standardized test, but I can write a 60-page paper like nobody's business. Like I was good at like research, right? I was good at application. So I remember I applied to UNCC and I got, rejected because of my GRE score. And they said, hey, just take the GRE over. I was like, look, I've taken it like twice. It ain't getting no better. Like this is legitimately what it is. Sorry, like I tried. I legitimately tried. And they were like, and I remember, I'll never forget because I saved the card. The dean sent me a message, a note, and she was like, well, unfortunately, it just doesn't seem like you're ready and you're serious about, pursuing your graduate studies. So, good luck to you. I was like, ooh, ouch, that hurts. So, I was in my office and I was crying, and my coworker came in there, and she was like, Tish, you need to apply to USC Columbia. I was like, I can't drive to South Carolina. I was like, I live here, like I can't move. And she was like, just apply, call them, kind of see what they say. So I called USC, this is 2008. I called USC and I was like, hey, I want to get my master's degree, but my GRE scores are not great, but I had over 3.0 in undergrad. They was like, oh my goodness, that's awesome. They were like, as long as you have above a 3.0, you can come here, we waive the GRE score, and if you live in Charlotte, you get in-state tuition. I was like, shut up! And I was like, I'm not moving to South Carolina, so I was like, how can I get in-state tuition? It's like, well, the thing is, if you're gonna get in-state tuition, you have to go full-time. I was like, full-time 2 years. And they were like, yes. So I was like, okay. I prayed, I was like, God, how can I work this out? How can I get my master's degree in 2 years and not have to like legitimately relocate, because I still had to work. So what I did was I got all of my classes, I don't know how I did it, I'm not gonna lie. But I got all of my classes on 1 day a week for 2 years. So I drove from Charlotte, I got up around 5:30 or 6, got on the road. Classes started at 9 here. My classes were on a Tuesday. I started from 9 to 4. On campus, and then I got back on the road. I drove back towards Rock Hill. Rock Hill, I had a satellite class from 6 to 8. I took that class from 6 to 8, and then I got back to Charlotte, usually like around 9:30ish, 10 o'clock. I was walking in my door, and I did that for 2 years. And I just drove once a week. And then I also had the 2 days of like my internship and practicum. So that was my hustle for 2 years. I look back on it, I have no idea how I did it, what I was thinking, I don't know. And then I also was working about,
Tish, I have a question. What was your work schedule like at the time?
So at the time, I was actually working at Atrium Health. I was working at behavioral health as a psychiatric technician. So a psych tech is basically like a CNA, but for behavioral health. That's the easiest way I can kind of put it. So I basically helped the nurses. I took the blood pressures, I made sure patients were where they were supposed to be, I kind of followed them around, I did all that stuff. So I was working about 25 to 30 hours a week, and I still had 2 days of my internship and practicum, and I still had to drive to South Carolina once a week. Again, I don't know how I did it. I just know I had to get it done because I knew where I was at McLeod. It wasn't a good feeling. So back up a little bit. Before I left McLeod, they found out that I was going to grad school, that I was going to school. They heard through the grapevine that I was going to school. And I knew that if they knew that I was going full time, that they were going to fire me. So I was like, no, I'm going part-time. It's not going to be a big deal. Class here and there. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to go on vacation. I went to Europe for like 2 weeks. Came back, put in my notice. When I came back, I was like, I was just kidding. I'm going full-time. Because they didn't care about my value. They didn't see my worth. They didn't see, they didn't understand like my ambition and what I wanted to do. So I was like, yeah, joke's on you, I'm leaving, so bye. And so I came here and finished 2 years, did the hooding, ceremony, and then I was like, okay, so you got your master's. What are you going to do next? And I knew that I had the passion of behavioral health and mental health, so that's what I did. So I started working at an agency called Access Family Services, and I was there for about 5 years or so, and I loved it. It was a lot of good, learning experience. I worked in intensive in-home. Everyone know what that is? Okay. No. Okay. So intensive in-home therapy. Okay. Intensive in-home therapy is basically where a therapist goes in and she has a team, or he has a team of clinicians, usually QPs, qualified professionals, and they do therapy. So I was already provisionally licensed in the state of North Carolina. So I had my LCSWA in 2010. Ooh, goodness gracious, I've been doing this a long time. Yeah, like 2012ish. So I was provisionally licensed, and so that's kind of like what I did. And I was providing therapy, and I worked with families on how to work with their children and how to seek treatment and provided therapeutic interventions, and that was kind of what I did during that time. I also did outpatient therapy. I learned how to do clinical assessments. I learned, I got promoted to being like a project manager, so basically making sure that they were losing a lot of money, so I made sure that we kept the money in-house because clinicians were missing deadlines for like authorizations to renew services and things like that. So I did that for a while and moved to their corporate office uptown, and it was great. My office was, right across from Michael Jordan's penthouse, so I could see. It was awesome. And I did that for a while, and then I went. They had some organizational changes. So in social work and mental health and special behavioral mental health, you're going to see there's going to be a lot of changeover. It's typically every 2 years there'll be an overhaul of some kind, either at the state or federal level or even at like the local level. So when you actually start getting in the field, you'll see that. You're going to see people come and go in therapy and community-based services. The life is usually about 2 years as far as like a career, and then people are usually ready to kind of change over because of burnout. Or they don't feel challenged, or they're not making the money that they want to make. So you'll start to see a lot of those, changes. So they did a lot of overhauls. So I ended up going and working in the day treatment area. Does anyone know what day treatment is? Yes? No? Okay.
No.
So, no. Okay. All right. So day treatment is basically for children that have behavioral, issues and challenges, and they can't be in traditional school settings. They go to a day treatment from 8 to 3 o'clock, 8 to 4. They get educational credits, and then they also get a lot of behavioral modification. So I became the therapist for the day treatment center. And it was at that point where I was like, I don't want to work with children. A lot of the kids were very aggressive physically. They would try to hit you with things, they would flip desks, they would punch windows. And I remember it was one day where, a kid that had just got there, he had been there about a month or so, and he basically tried to charge at me. The old school pencil sharpeners, the metal part that catches the shavings. He tried to hit me with that. And he was about, 11, 12. And I remember I walked into the CEO office and he just looked at me, he was like, "You're quitting, aren't you?" I was like, "Indeed I am." This is not my calling. God told me that this was not and I just realized that, working with, children and adolescents was not my niche, especially when they had those types of behaviors. So I went and I got promoted to the director region, and I was a director at the Gastonia office. So I had clinicians up under me, and I still work with families, here and there, but I wasn't in the day treatment setting anymore because, again, you will start to realize when you start working what it is you love, what you're good at, what you have a passion, for, and as well you're going to realize the things that you don't. And sometimes it takes a while to really realize that. Specifically when, in social work, we kind of think of social work in just this little box, but I'll get to that a little bit later. So I did that as a director, and I love the administrative work. So when I got to USC, the concentrations have changed quite a bit, but my concentration was macro, so organizations and communities. So I knew I always wanted to do organizational work. I love the administrative aspect of providing social services and just the kind of facilitation of it. I love leading and supporting others. So I stayed there for a couple of years as director. And then at that time, I was making better money, for that time period. This was, like 20, I should have brought my resume, like 2014-ish, I feel like. No, 2012-ish. So I was, doing pretty well there. But again, I was not happy with the salary that I was getting. I was like, I felt like could be doing more than what I was doing, and I felt like my worth was still being undervalued. So at the time, there was a big push for MCOs, managed care organizations. You guys might know them as LMEs, local management entities. So these are the organizations that manage all of the federal funds now of like Medicaid dollars, and they basically disperse them out to community agencies at various counties. So I applied for this position as integrated care manager at the MCO, which was in Kannapolis, North Carolina. It was much better pay. I think at that time, I got pushed up to like the 80s, which I was like, oh my God, balling! Like, this is like awesome, you know what I mean? Like, no social workers make this, like it's just pretty much unheard of. So I did that, and I had a team of about 15, 17 clinicians that were across 22 counties that I managed from Kannapolis. And of those clinicians were licensed clinical social workers, LPCs, licensed professional counselors, LCAS, so that's licensed clinical addiction specialists, and I had a couple of RNs, which was really cool. And I was there for about a year and a half. And I probably never would have left it. I love managing others. I love being able to travel. I love being able to, to walk around at the time in like my business suits and, give presentations and meet with staff and do performance improvement plans, which I didn't have to do of. And I really got to show my, not only my clinical skills, but also my administrative abilities. So I had the lowest turnover of any department within that organization for that year, and I was super proud of that. I had great reviews from my staff, so I realized, okay, I'm really great at managing people. Like, I'm really good at bringing out the best in people, and so that became my niche. So once I realized the kids and adolescents that were like trying to stab me, that was me. I commend all of those that feel like, that do great in that. That was just not my role. And so I felt like this was really my role. So, they had some people come in and they started kind of assessing. They were assessing, all of the departments and, seeing if they were needed, basically, long story short. So I remember getting called into my VP's office and I see the HR lady sitting there and I'm like, okay, they're getting ready to lay me off. I know it's getting ready to happen. I'm getting ready to get laid off. And I sat down and she was like, yeah, here's your severance package. And I was like, crap, I got laid off. I was like, how many people got laid off in social work? Like, that was my first, real rude awakening. I was like, I could legit lose my job in social work? That was bad. But yeah, I got laid off, so this was in 2015. And when I got laid off, it was a very humble walk, needless to say. And when I got laid off, I found out that I was pregnant. I was like, isn't this something? Like, what are you trying to show me right now? So I was laid off for about a year and a half. And I remember, going and again, I was licensed at this time. I went to a training in Winston-Salem that was hosted by the NASW for those that wanted to be a clinical supervisor. So I'm a clinical supervisor in North and South Carolina for those that are looking to get their clinical license. And I remember I stood up at the NASW training and I asked a question about employment. So in North Carolina, specifically in Charlotte, at that time, we saw a lot of jobs that were being lost to nurses, because there was this very big push for integrated healthcare. And they felt that if you had an RN that was doing basically traditional social work stuff or social work roles, that it would be better. So not only were they replacing the jobs that social workers had, they were also paying the nurses a lot more to do less. So I had a very big issue with that, and I expressed that to the NASW. I still express that to the NASW. I've been asked, hey, why aren't you, a member? Okay, well, this is why. Again, no, bad blood with the NASW. I think they do amazing work. But from my perspective and in my journey and the journey of a lot of people that I know, specifically in Charlotte, there was not a lot of advocacy for the jobs of social workers. So you had all of these people that were leaving, their bachelor's degree in social work. They were leaving with their master's degree in social work. A lot of them have loans, and they could not find employment. Well, that's a problem. And I expressed to them that I had an issue with that. I felt that if you could go and promote policy and, at the Capitol and, LGBTQ rights, and you had all of these teachers across the country at the time that were marching, for higher wages and higher pay. But when you look at social workers, we're equal. We're equal in terms of pay. In some states, we're lower than teachers. But I did not see where the advocacy was for our profession. And I still have an issue with that. I was, a clinical supervisor, and I had people calling me. They were like, hey, can you be my clinical supervisor? And I was like, yeah, of course I can. When do you want to start? And they were like, immediately. I was like, great. Well, where do you work? And they'd be like, oh, I work at Verizon call center. Okay, well, you have your master's, correct? Yeah, I have a master's in social work. And you work at Verizon call center? Yeah. Why are you working at Verizon call center and you have a master's in social work? Because they couldn't find a job. So in terms of clinical supervision, you cannot get clinical hours to become a licensed independent practicing psychotherapist if you are not getting clinical hours. Well, you can't get clinical hours if there are no jobs available. So it becomes a cycle. So you have people that are getting these degrees, but if they don't get hired and there are no jobs available, then they can't become licensed practicing psychotherapists. So now they're stalled. So that's still a conversation. I literally just did a webinar for NASW. I'm still not a member. I did a webinar for them literally like 2 weeks ago. We still have this conversation because I am a social work advocate. I believe that we are needed. I believe that we need to be utilized in a variety of different settings. So I feel like the world, the work world that we go into should be reflective of that, and positions should be created, made available, and we should really get outside of the box in terms of what it is that we can do. So after they asked me, they kind of nodded, and I sat down at the training session, and we just kind of like moved forward or whatever. And so I decided to open my private practice transitions management group, not because I necessarily wanted to, but because I was unemployed for like a year and a half. And I was like, okay, I got this degree, I have this license, I've got to start making some money for myself. So thank God I have a very supportive husband that was like, you got this, babe. So I created my LLC, I started Transition Management Group, and I started, doing private practice and seeing people, clients on my own. And it's been great. And I think that was the benefit of honestly getting a licensure, and why if you're gonna, if you want to, get your master's, of course, I'm definitely an advocate if you want to go the clinical route to get your license, because I can always generate revenue with my license no matter where I go, whether that's consulting, whether that's in another state, whether that's, contracting myself out, I will always be able to turn a profit. So I started Transition Management Group, started doing clinical supervision, and then it worked really, really well. I worked in Atrium Health, which is, big healthcare company, hospital system in North and South Carolina, actually. So I was working there as well at Levine Cancer Institute. I worked with the sickle cell department, so doing psychotherapy for individuals that have chronic pain and illness. And I love that work as well because I got to do therapy. I'm a therapist. So hashtag, yeah. So and I did that for a while. And in conjunction with that, I was also working with individuals in my private practice. So I did both. Again, remember, two 2 jobs is pretty much what I've always done, 2, avenues of income at minimum. So I did that for a little over a year and some change. And I was still working with athletes, I was still working with, other organizations, but this was all like in my private practice. So while I was working at the hospital, again, I loved the work, meaning the clinical work and actually working with patients, but I did not like the bureaucracy. I did not like the fact that I was pigeonholed where I was, meaning they only looked at me as far as the medical professionals that I was working with, the doctors who were specialists, and they're making $300,000, $400,000, and they had a problem, with me wanting to be ambitious and to want to look for other opportunities within the organization, which there really weren't any. I think I applied to over like 36 jobs, 90% of which I was super overqualified for. But there are so many applicants and so many external and internal that there just wasn't, a lot of positions available. So when I did that, they knew about it, but they kind of felt like I didn't want to be there, even though I wanted to be there to serve, but they only saw me as a case manager, and that was it. In their mind, that was all I could do. That's all I should be doing. They tried to give me, other, options, but when I left Cardinal, I took about a 30% pay decrease because I just wanted to get back in the field. I just wanted to kind of, do a little bit more work. Asian was a big organization, a big hospital system. I was like, there'll be plenty of opportunities to move around. And when I got in-house, I realized, okay, there are not. So during this time, I made a lot of connections, made a lot of friends. I had a mentor that was actually worked at the league office, the NFL league office in New York. And he and I just kind of stayed in contact. We have lunch and coffee and things like that. Birthday emails, Merry Christmas, those types of things. He was a mentor. And I had pitched to him this idea that I really wanted to work with the Panthers, and I felt like it would be a huge, opportunity to have somebody that was in-house, right? So he was like, yeah, I think that'd be really cool, but it didn't exist. And there hadn't really been an express need. So this was about 2.5, almost 3 years ago now, when I had that conversation with him. But again, nurtured the relationship, we stayed in contact. And so I remember sitting at my cubicle at the hospital, and I was busy in my work. Like I busied myself. I didn't focus on the blocks that I have, so I'm literally just typing away. I'm also a great psychotherapist. I'm enjoying it. I'm just going to stay positive. And I remember looking at my phone, and I see his name pop up. And I remember looking at it. I looked up. I was like, "Thank you, Jesus. This is it." So, and it was. He was like, "Hey, so are you still interested in working, with the Panthers as far as therapy?" I was like, yeah, absolutely. I was already on the panel as a EAP provider for the team for the league, so it wasn't a very big transition. And I've been doing psychotherapy work now for a decade, and I've been working with athletes, so it wasn't a big transition. So he called me, he connected me with the Panthers. I interviewed along with a couple of other PhDs and some other clinicians that were, in the area. I met with the coach, I met with the GM, and they liked me. And they offered me the job. Now in football, things work very, very quickly. They don't waste a lot of time. So, I interviewed and I was like, hey, when would you like me to start? This was it was 2 weeks before. So it was on a Tuesday. They were like, yeah, we need you to start Monday. I was like, okay, great. Which Monday? Next Monday. Oh, okay. So I got the formal offer on a Tuesday night. So when I went back into the hospital on that Wednesday, I put in my notice. And they were like, okay, when will your last day be? I was like, this Friday. That was 2 days. So they got a 2-day notice from me. And I started with the Panthers that Monday because that's how football works. You got to be ready to go. So it wasn't a situation where I was like, God, I really hate to not give you guys 2 weeks. I understand, professional courtesy and things like that. But that's the NFL. So, I made sure that all the patients were taken care of. It was a very smooth transition, and because they only looked at me as being like a case manager. I got very efficient at my role. So where it may have taken, somebody else about, 8, 9 hours to do that job, I was legitimately done in like 4 every day. Like I had time to kill, because I had created systems. So it wasn't a situation where they were left in a lurch. Like this was, I made it very easy. So I started with the Panthers right away. I got introduced to the team. They told, what my role was. And I really started to build a rapport there, getting the guys to know me. This was just last September, so I haven't been in the role that long. So this will literally officially be my first full season. So I did got really comfortable with them. And at the time, I was going in and, my suits, because remember, I came from healthcare, right? So I'm going into my suits and my pearl earrings and, and they're like, in the world? And I was like, oh my gosh, they're not gonna respond to me like this, right? So I was like, okay, Tish, you are in something that is very, very new. This hasn't been done, before in this sense. You're the first. And I was like, okay, you've gotta get comfortable in your own skin. You've gotta make this your own. And you've got to, be proactive. So I was like, you know what? I ditched the 3-piece suits because I had this vision, of what a therapist was supposed to look like, but not what a therapist was going to look like in the National Football League. Okay, so I ditched that and I started wearing my awesome dope Steve Madden sneakers and my jeans and my USC, shirts and sweatshirts, to work because that was the uniform. And literally all of those things, when they saw the Carolina come through, they're like, oh, you live in Carolina? Oh, that's what's up, Miss Tish. I'm Miss Tish. But it started to allow them to realize that number one, I was a person. That number two, that they didn't have to be afraid of me or my education or my experience, that I had to normalize what talking to a therapist really meant. And that's kind of where my platform really started to kind of build, and where I came, did the dope therapist thing, because it helps to realize that if you go and you speak to someone or you seek help or you seek treatment, then you don't necessarily have to worry about the stigma of it. You don't have to worry about the stigma of being diagnosed. It's really, okay, you're going to speak to someone to talk about your issues, to talk about your hurdles, and to help develop a plan with you to get through those things. That's really all it is. And so when I did that, people started to let their guard down a little bit more. They come sit with me at the lunchroom, because before it was like, I was like the plague, I think. Not long, but for like a week. They definitely warmed up to me quicker than what we expected. They were like, we give you about 2 or 3 years before they really was like, God, 2 or 3 years? It's gonna be lonely for me, So it was about 2 weeks, 2 or 3 weeks actually. And they really started to kind of get comfortable with me. I'd go in with what I didn't know were J's. I just love the colors. But they loved them, and it literally just started a conversation piece. And so even if they were talking to me, just about the weather or about, the movies that they saw or dinner or restaurants, to go to, what happens was in that rapport building stage, and for those of you that decide to go into like clinical practice, that's something that we talk about a lot in the therapeutic relationship, is building rapport. And that's something that can start at the beginning. It's something that can be ongoing. It's something that might have to be, revamped at some point in time. But what that did was it allowed them to, connect with me on a very, normal topic. So when they needed something or when something was really wrong, they come to me. Because they're like, you know what, Tish has my best interest. Tish is not gonna, steer me wrong. And so that's kind of what happened. I went to a clinician summit in New York at the League's office a couple of weeks ago, actually. And at that time, I wasn't all the way certain that I was the first. It had been speculated, and even on like a couple of articles on like ESPN, they mentioned it, but we were kind of like, I'm not really sure if I'm like the first. So I went there, and I met all the clinicians that were with the teams and found out that they were all contracted. So yeah, I am indeed the first to be hired full-time in-house. The Kansas City Chiefs have just hired someone else. So now there's 2 of us that are full-time in-house in the league. And it is my hope that this is something that will be picked up as we start to become more aware that, especially with professional athletes, that you're not just treating, the body of the person, that the mind is very much connected. And so that has also become a part of my platform, is that we have to start to look at our mental health and our wellness and mental illness, and being mindful of it and caring for it in the same way we do our body. So the same way that you go to a primary care physician, the same way that you go to, your OBGYN, or if you have, allergies, or your allergist, why don't we do that with mental health? Why don't we have a therapist that we check in with at least quarterly, that we have identified if we're having an issue or if we need to work through something. So luckily enough, for the Panthers, I'm there 24/7. Well, not 24/7. I'm there 5 days a week, sometimes 6. I go and work tomorrow, and I get to do this type of work. I get asked a lot about scheduling. So for me and my schedule, the off season is still a very busy season for me. So I do a lot of the traveling with the scouts. So the Senior Bowl, the Pro Bowls. I was at Combine, this year. So I do the clinical, assessments and the personality, piece to make sure that they'll be a good fit for our organization. And that's been a really, really cool experience. So my husband, watches our daughter, because I was gone for 5 weeks. When it was all said and done, not back to back, but, I'm gone for 4 and 5 days at a time, a lot of times doing these scouting events. And I'm not the only woman there, but I am the only clinician that is there at these events. And I'm really just assessing the personality characteristics and the traits of the potential draft eligible players to see if they're going to be a good fit for our organization and what we're trying to achieve. So I am on the road a lot during the off season, but then we also have breaks. So we get 5 weeks off, paid, and that was very cool for me, because I remember when I walked in, they was like, yeah, this is what the year will look like, this is what the schedule will look like, and then we'll take a break from here to here. And I remember asking my supervisor, I was like, so do I submit PTO during that time? And he looked at me, he was like, what is PTO? I was like, are you kidding me? I was like, no, what is PTO? They didn't know what PTO was on football outside, because it's just what football is, it's just a schedule. So me coming in from, healthcare and, just straight behavioral health, I literally had to really try to change what my mindset was about this role, and not go into it with all these preconceived notions and, kind of staying within a box of what I felt I was supposed to be doing. So that leads me to kind of the reason why I wanted to come here today, is to really, definitely encourage you to think outside of the box when it comes to your social work degree. I was definitely someone who went through, as I said, a lot of all the training and the education and the experiences, which are needed, okay? I do not take everything that I did led me to here. And it was all valuable experience, whether I liked the organization I was working with or not, whether I liked the people I was working with or not, I learned at every single step of the way. And that's what I definitely encourage you guys to do when you get ready to go into the field, when you get ready to work. Even if you don't like where you are, which a lot of times you may not, learn something. Always seek knowledge. So I have so much knowledge on a wide variety of different topics that I'm actually in shock for myself a lot of times. It's because I gained a lot of knowledge, between undergrad and to this point that I just didn't even realize, and I can use it in a variety of different settings. Even in terms of just being a clinical psychotherapist, I've become so ingrained in using cognitive behavioral therapy and motivational interviewing that I do it effortlessly, and I don't even realize I'm doing it because it became second nature for me. So when you think about going into the field and when you're looking, at your next step, granted, you may have to do, a lot of the traditional type of social work or mental health or aging or DSS. You may have to do those things. But even when you go into those settings, always look for opportunities where you can grow your knowledge and you can grow your experience. Don't wait for them to come to you. Ask for them. Seek them out. Make connections. That's something that I don't feel like we really talk about enough, is network with other people. Network with people that are in other organizations. What I realized for social work and why I kind of advocated for my role in this, because when they sent me the job description, it wasn't me. you know, when they showed me the job description for the Panthers, they wanted something else. They had like some PhD and Master of Science and things that I didn't feel like would really benefit the players necessarily. And so I kind of had the discussion. I was like, okay, I hear you. This sounds okay, but this is what I can do. And here's why I think I would be a better fit. And I laid all of that out. And they listened. And they said yes. And so you really start to think about transferable skills. Okay, not just what you get your education is, not just in your experience, but where else can the skills that you have attained during your experience and during your education, where can those things take you? And again, I'm just definitely a living testimony of that. So there are, you can be, you know, with our degree, you can go into Fortune 500 companies, you can go into EAP, you can go into leadership, you can go and be an executive director or a CEO of a nonprofit and flourish. You can go, has anyone watched the show Billions? Okay, so I get compared to like, you know, Tupper's Axelrod and I'm like Wendy, okay? If you haven't watched Billions, try to watch it, it's on Showtime, I'm just saying. Now, they are very extreme. We're not doing all that where I work, okay? So, but in terms of Wendy is someone, she is a clinical psychologist, and she works at she works with traders and those that, you know, are basically like in the stock market, and, you know, and she basically teaches them how to be mentally tough and keep them motivated so they can go out and be their best selves and make a lot of money for, you know, this billion-dollar firm, right? So I get compared to her a lot. But in the sense of, that is not something that people would think that we could use our degree in, is those types of roles, but you can. I am, you know, and it's very, you know, it's just important that you really start to think about things that you really want to do, even if it's super far-fetched. What I'm doing now was very much far-fetched. It wasn't something that people just associated, you know, with. And I had to realize, number one, listen to myself and my heart and, you know, my conversation with God, and say, God, I just do not feel that what I'm doing right now is what I was legitimately called to do. In previous roles that I was in, I would have called out probably about 3 to 4 times by now. I'm sick, I don't feel good, I can't, like, I need a mental health day. Like, I just don't have it. I have not called in sick once since starting this job, because I am living in my passion and my purpose, and I know that. And not to say that all those other experiences were not beneficial for me, but it wasn't necessarily my calling. I learned something from them, I gained valuable experience, but I wanted to do something else. And so really ask yourself that. Again, you guys are going to be, you know, just starting out, but really you'll start to realize quickly what it is you don't want to do. And so you'll start to carve out, okay, I don't like working with this population. I don't like working in these types of settings. You know, I don't necessarily want to take children, you know, from families or from parents. You'll start to figure all that out. And once you start eliminating what you don't like and open your mind to realizing that you don't just have to do those things, the sky is the limit. So that's all I got for you guys. And I'm definitely, any questions, thoughts? How long did I take? Okay. Anybody have any questions? Yeah.
What are the issues that come up most often when you're working with players?
So, a variety of things, actually. It's not necessarily one particular thing. I think one of the biggest misconceptions about my role is that players come to me for football-related stuff, and it's not. It's literally quite the opposite. I don't really, you know, I'm not really contacted for things that are going on the field. I'm contacted for things that are going on off the field. So that, I can't really, you know, specify like any one particular issue.
I was just wondering if it was more like interpersonal, more just, I always figured it was different from a sports psychologist in the sense that you were dealing more outside, with networks and, fitting in and problems that occur, but I'm winging it here, I have no idea.
Yeah, so it's literally relationship issues, it's, anxiety, it might be depression, it's, I specialize in, or, my specialty is life transitions. So literally why I named my company Transitions Management Group. And that's kind of, a lot of the things that really come up is those types of things. It's not things related to necessarily on the field. If a guy has, an issue with like a coach or something like that, we could probably, we work through that. But for the most part, it's things completely unrelated to sports. So there's definitely still a sports psychology aspect that I do in terms of, all right, what is the hesitancy with you coming off the line? What is the delay? Why is there a delay? If it's something that's more like a cognitive block or, not having enough confidence in kind of like what they're doing or knowledge about what they're doing, then we kind of work through those things. So there's definitely a sports psychology, piece to what I do in terms of just kind of like motivation types of things. But the varieties of things that we talk about are
Because they're just human, right?
They are human. So like I said early, not, separating and dissociating the mind from the body. They are one person, they are people. So I've been asked, was I starstruck when I went in there? Even the rookies asked me that. They didn't say starstruck, they was like, so are you nervous, about being here? I was like, no. Like, were you scared, or like, were you fearful kind of coming in? I was like, yeah, God didn't give me the spirit of fear, so no, I'm good. Actually. No, the answer was, I think maybe like the first thing was like, oh my God, there's Cornelson. And I was like, Luke! But, no, I wasn't, because they are guys and they're a great group of guys and they definitely, make me, feel very, very welcome, and they are people. And that's what I have to remember. So where anyone else might be like, oh my God, that's Cam hitting me. It's like, what up, Cam? So it kind of took them, to get used to me, and they're still getting used to me. Again, I've only been there since September. I came in midway through the season, and now we're going to have a lot of new players. So it's going to kind of be a revamp for me as well, because they have to kind of get used to me. I think you have, yeah.
So you say you deal with players, and you might have hinted at it or not, or whatever, but do you deal with not just the players, do you deal with like the administrative side, like for instance, the coaches, the GM, the council, help them too, as well? Do they have their own?
Great question. So I have essentially been dubbed, and this is probably self-imposed on me, as the clinical therapist for the organization. So I see people, and all of the partners have, texted me and said, Tish, can I come by? Coaches, staff, everybody. If someone needs, assistance for their child and they just don't know where to go, how to turn, what to search for, they'll come to me, ask me for, my experience, my expertise, and I'll probably refer them out, especially if they're their children. I don't see the kids, their children. So I have a network of therapists that I partner with. They're not contracted, but just that I partner with to help me in those types of situations that understand the very unique needs of our organization in terms of time. And then being flexible and make sure they accept their insurance and everyone understands how their EAP works. So I see everybody. Anyone that needs to contact me, they do. Yes.
So have you found it difficult being the only clinician, because you just said anybody can contact you, so do you think there's a need for multiple people?
In the Panthers?
Mm-hmm.
At this time, no.
Okay.
I pretty much have it under control. I get a lot of, resumes, requests, I need to shut down my LinkedIn. It's gotten bananas. But at this time, no. And that's because, everyone, number one, respects, during the season, my priority is the team, are the players, period. So even if someone on the other side, they need to connect with me, we might have a few minutes or times or any opportunity I have that I make myself available. But it's not like I'm getting flooded with everybody from every department. It could be hey Tish, what do you think about this? And I'll give them my opinion or my expertise. And if I feel like they need someone else, I refer them out. And I kind of facilitate all that. I'll call the therapist that I think they're going to, hey, I'm sending somebody your way. This is kind of what's going on. They don't follow with me anymore because now that's patient the anticipation and client confidentiality. So I just kind of like do the referral and leave it at that. So for right now, it's manageable for me. It's busy, but it's manageable. So I love it because I get the opportunity to build a clinical foundation because there wasn't one that really existed. So I get to build that from ground up, and why I majored or my concentration was macro, social work was because for that reason. It's like I love working with organizations and communities. I love building things, from scratch, and that's something that I get to, be very proud of because it's mine. Yeah. And I think you had a question.
Yeah, what do you think it would take to have someone like you in all 32 teams?
Ownership, buy-in. That's literally it. Not every owner is like David, is like Tepper, is like our owner, or owner and coach. And not every coach is like Coach Rivera. I mean, they are just two very progressive people. So literally, I would not be here if it was not for them. And the GM and the DPE at our organization, because they had to, number one, believe that it was needed. They had to see the value. If they didn't see the value, then I would not be here. So that's what it's going to take for every organization. And again, I think it's coming. I do. I think we're on the cusp. Like I said, the Chiefs have just hired somebody full-time in-house. And I looked at his resume and I was like, yeah, I would hire him if I were you. He looked pretty good. And so I think there's a change that is occurring. And I think hopefully we'll see more of this and people will see the benefit. And also recognizing, with any kind of therapy relationship, it's going to be ebb and flow. Like there'll be times where, I might have, 10 players that I see, in a day. And then there might be times where they haven't contacted me in 4 weeks. It's literally just kind of how therapy works. And we can't necessarily separate that just because it's football. So a lot of it is going to be, you just have to see the worth in the role and having someone available and on site and on hand when and if, something happens. So a lot of the work that I do is very much preventative. I have a crisis management plan that I work through, in the event of a crisis. But a lot of the things that I try to do is preventative work. So should something, happen, I have a foundation, I have, people that are in place where all I got to do is kind of like make a call. And we can kind of get them, the care and the help that they needed. So I hope that this is going to be something that, even with all the clinicians that are contracted with the teams, every team has a contracted clinician. But I hope that some of them will get, extended, full-time offers, but we'll see. Yes.
Do you get referrals from the coach or other people? Or do you ever take the initiative to reach out, or are you mostly responding?
So it's a combination of all of that, actually. So our coaches will come to me like, hey, Tish, can you just go talk to them? And I'll be like, okay, cool. So I'll touch base, with the player, and I'll say, hey, because their schedules are incredibly tight. So that was the other thing I kind of had to shift my mindset on. It's like, I might have a legitimate 45 minutes to an hour with a client that reaches out to me in my private practice, right? I'm not going to have that in football because that's not the schedule. There's not a free hour for any of them in the schedule. It's, 6 a.m. To 3 o'clock p.m., 4 o'clock p.m., and it is back to back, nonstop. And so we might have a few minutes, and so that's what that looks like. Or if we didn't get to cover everything we need to in those few minutes, then I'll say, hey, I'll stay after, you let me know, or we can do, I do teletherapy, so we can do a session, or, you call me, whatever. I had to be flexible. So I had this thing, I always say, be water. You gotta be water. You gotta be able to flow and change with what the needs are, and I couldn't go in there with, just, nope, if we can't meet from, 2 o'clock to 3, then that's it. That's not how this works. And if you're truly here to help and, to be a benefit, as I am to these men, that I had to be water. I had to be fluid. I had to be flexible so that I can meet the needs. So if a coach does say, Tish, go talk to, can you go, touch base with the player, I do it. I do not disclose anything that a player talks to me about with any coach, owner, no one. The only way that they get that information from me is through a subpoena. But honestly, I'm just fortunate to have an organization that does they don't want to know. Like, they don't want to know what's going on with the player. All they want to know, Tish, did you talk to him? We're good, coach. Cool. The end. That's it. They don't want to know anymore. And that works out great for me because I'm not put in any, and have not been put in any kind of uncomfortable situation where I feel like I got to break the trust of a player. If I break the trust of any of those guys, then that's my reputation. And my reputation means a lot to me. And the reputation that I have with these, warriors, these men, means a lot to me as well. So they come from a variety of different ways. My number is always posted with the in the cafeteria or in the locker room. So if guys are in meetings and they're just kind of grabbing food, they'll text me, "Hey Tish, you got a few minutes? When are you going to be free?" And I meet with them that way. So again, be water. You have to be fluid to kind of meet the need.
So a common theme that I hear in your talk today is being flexible.
Yes.
And I wonder if for the students, if you could just talk to them a little bit, because I think that's such an important aspect of any job. And if you don't like something, switch, and just kind of maybe talk about a little bit of the resources and maybe how you handle the situation where you really had to pivot and move on to something else, because I think that's really important.
So remember I mentioned earlier that I would say at least the field of like mental health, that there's typically like a haul or overhaul or change within every 2 years, right? So I've been doing this now over a decade, legitimately. And literally there was a change every like 2 years. So you get comfortable with change. You get comfortable with being flexible. You get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Because it's literally just kind of the feel. So when something new comes up, when there's a change, when there's a crisis, like I said, as far as like the preventative, work and kind of setting that clinical foundation, I'm prepared. So therefore, if something happens, I'm not like freaking out because I'm water. Be water. I'm just gonna flow with whatever I kind of need to do, handle it when I get there. Don't freak out. And make sure that you are just being open to what comes at you. Because everything you're not going to be able to control, everything you're not going to be able, to change no matter what your desires are. Sometimes you're just going to, have to be water in order to be effective. So I think flexibility is going to be, or is key in this field, no matter what direction you all, want to go in. So I just think, it's just important to kind of keep that in mind, that policies will change. There will be organizational overhaul. People will be let go. People will be laid off. People will be fired. People will be promoted, above you. You will take on more caseloads, more activities than what your job signs for and calls for. And just FYI, in every job description that you see moving forward, especially if you work in organizations, communities, there's going to be a little sentence at the very bottom of your job description, I don't care where you go, that's going to say, "and other duties as needed." That means anything they throw at you. Doesn't even matter what it is. Anything. That's you. So definitely be aware. Know when you've reached your limit. Know when to advocate for yourself. As social workers, I do not feel that we do a lot of that. We don't advocate for ourselves. We don't advocate for higher pay. We don't necessarily advocate for, I need my time back, or my caseload is getting too high to the point where I'm not sleeping. I'm have extreme compassion fatigue. Just because, you are in a profession that's giving and that's caring and that, promotes the wellness and the benefit of others, does not mean that you have to do it to the detriment of yourself. So know when to say, you know what, I can't do anymore. This is my threshold, you have met it. So being open to all of those types of things. Yes.
Going off of your advocacy, you mentioned previously that you are being big in advocacy. Do you think that this platform that you have now is trying to bring more awareness to the need for social workers, in a sense of, like when you're talking about the atrium, how they kind of devalued your position?
Yeah.
Do you feel that platform helps?
I hope so.
Yeah.
Again, I'm kind of like in the early stages of it, so we'll see. But again, a platform is not necessarily something that means that everyone's going to, jump on. It just means that this is what I believe in. This is what I feel is important. And I feel like if we don't advocate for ourselves, like who will? So even when I got hired with the Panthers, and they did, the article of me, and I didn't really expect it to go as far as it did. I didn't expect to be interviewed with ESPN, even though my husband and his friends were like, Tish, you're gonna be interviewed with ESPN. I was like, no, I'm not. I'm just doing therapy. What the heck is that? Like, I don't get it. But I was, like the second week. But when they did the articles, it was very important for me that they listed out, it's not on there, but that they listed out my credentials. That everyone knew that I was a social worker. I had people that were like emailing me and saying, oh my God, Dr. Tish, Doctor. I'm like, nope. I don't have a PhD or a DSW, not yet. We'll see. But
You're always welcome.
I'll be honest, I'm probably not gonna. You know, but it was. I wanted them to know that I was a social worker, because I wanted them to realize what we could do with our degree. And a lot of what I do is education on licensures, on education. So there's, like I said, there's this wide misconception that, you know, anyone that is a therapist has to have a PhD. Well, there are some PhDs that are doing therapy and they haven't passed the exam. They're not clinical. They're basically kind of like, anybody know who like Ayana Van Zandt is? She's like out here fixing people's lives with like no credentials or anything. They're basically like life coaches. And I'm not belittling it, but I worked hard, you know, for my education. I worked hard for my licensure. I've had 10 years of education and licensure. That's not even experience. That's just the educational component alone was 10 years. So I wanted people to know that no, I do not have my PhD. If you go look at any of your EAPs, you might see some PhDs, but majority of what you're going to see is LCSW, LPC, LMFT, and a lot of people don't know that. So it is up to us to, especially if you go into, you know, the clinical field, to advocate of what it is we do and the knowledge that we have, because not a lot of people are open to it. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm finding that looking at clinical jobs, I'm getting some questions about like, okay, you're a social worker compared to LPCs and MFTs. Like you're not trained in you're not taking as many classes in psychotherapy. Like what makes the social work perspective, what makes you as qualified as say those people that have 68 credit hours in those? And so how have you advocated for the social work profession as a psychotherapy profession too, and as a clinical profession?
So, like literally just kind of what I just said, is educating people on what the licensure and what a social worker can really do. And like I said, that's why it was very important to me, no matter if you go on any of my platforms, well, mine is Twitter really, but I haven't updated it yet, but like if you go on, I'm more of a LinkedIn person, but if you go on my platforms, you're gonna see my credentials, you know, out there. And that's literally how the conversation starts, that's how the advocacy starts, because they're gonna Google that stuff. What in the world is this? And some people, if they don't recognize it and they don't see a PhD, then they're just kind of going to move on, because that's just what the perception is that psychotherapists are PhDs. And that's just not the truth. I mean, some of them are, the ones that pass the licensure exam, or the clinical exam, but a majority of them are me. Are LMFTs. So you have to, definitely wherever you go and when you're kind of getting that conversation, encourage them, show them like, hey, let's go into psychology today. I'm going to show you something. Type in a zip code and look at all the credentials that are listed on psychotherapists. So it's up to you all, if you're going into that field, to help change the narrative, to help educate people on what it is that it is, what we do and where we can go. So it does start with me, but it also starts with you and you and you and you and you. So educate people, even if you're looking for jobs or, applying for like internships, even the people sometimes that are hiring you don't know. Like I said, at the Panthers, no one over there is clinical. They didn't know what that stuff was. They sent me something that they thought looked good together. And I was like, I don't feel like this is going to get you guys what you need. So this is what my licensures mean. This is what my background is in. This is what my education means. This is how it is a benefit. So a lot of it is the advocating, as I said earlier, advocate for yourself. Advocate for your profession. Advocate for this field. Advocate for this MSW degree that you guys are getting and that you want to utilize. Advocate for the student loan debt that you may have. So it starts with us. I'm sorry,
well, you made a really strong case for self-advocacy and advocacy on the individual level, but you kind of intimated that maybe higher up, like NASW,
Mhm.
the advocacy wasn't what it might be for pay.
Mhm.
And could you just talk a little bit about that?
In terms of what I think they should do, or?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah. So,
We're all friends here.
yeah, so, again, I love the work that the NASW does, and I'm just speaking for, in regards to the NASW. I love the work that they do, I love the advocacy that they do in terms of, special populations, okay? However, it is my view, and it's just me, that currently, social workers are now a special population. That we have people, and the reason that, we have to do promotional videos for the MSW degree and for a social work degree is because there are not, and I'm going to speak for North Carolina, there are not a lot of jobs. It is very hard to find work. So how do we keep advocating for people, be a social worker, go and get that MSW, do these things, and when they finish, the opportunities are limited. In Mecklenburg County, for psychotherapists, if you're a private practice, most of the panels are closed. Meaning, even if you have a license, you can't get on an insurance panel because they have reached the threshold. Mecklenburg County has so many LCSW, LPCs where they're like, we don't need another psychotherapist on our panel. And that's not just with Blue Cross Blue Shield, that's with Cigna, I believe there are about 4 or 5 other ones that are closed out. So which means, well, if you're a practicing social worker, if you're a practicing psychotherapist, and you can't get on the insurance panel, how do you make money? How do you make money if all the agencies have reached their threshold, or all they're hiring for or want to pay are people that are newly provisionally licensed? So like if you're an LCSWA, you can a lot of times find work. It's not going to be a lot of money, but you'll get employed. So my charge and my challenge and my conversations with individuals at the NASW has been just that. It's great that we are advocating for LGBTQ. It's great that we're advertising and promoting for immigration laws and policy on abortion rights and all. I think it's great. It's needed. But we also need to be advocates for our own profession, especially when you charge $250, $400 for courses for the NASW. And that's why when I did my webinar for them, the only way I agreed to do it is if they made it free. That was the only way I was going to do it. I was like, it's fine, you're not going to pay me, that's cool, but I was like, if I'm going to do this webinar, it needs to be free for at least the people that are members of the NASW and a minimal cost for the people that aren't. Because if our goal is to have access and to educate, then let's do that. And let's make it so that there are opportunities for social workers to flourish in a variety of different settings. We need to be advocating for roles in Fortune 500 companies in leadership and organizational development. We need to be advocating for, before football, I was working at NASCAR because I had friends that were on the pit crew for like Jeff Gordon. So that's a lot of psychological stress. I wanted to go work, with NASCAR at a point. At some point, I may go into, working with, traders because they're in high stress positions. So there's an advocacy that needs to occur on a wider scale, especially for employment opportunities. It becomes very difficult to rationalize the continued use of or promoting, degrees, and especially when people are taking on debt and they don't have a job when they get out and when they finish. So that's literally what kind of got me here, is thinking outside the box and what else I can do. Like I said, I mentioned those transferable skills, and really thinking of, what else can I do where I can make the income that I want to make, where I can get the experience that I want to do, and where I can still live out my passion and help people. So yeah. Any other questions?
How do you befriend all these people?
Different experience. I invited people for lunch, to coffee. A good friend of mine is Victor Armstrong, and I don't know if you guys know who he is, but he is VP of Behavioral Health at Atrium. And he is a huge, advocate for mental health. Like, you follow him on Twitter, you follow him on any social media platform. I think he's actually getting ready to do a TED Talk. He's been a friend and a mentor for like years, and I literally just invite people out. Hey, can I pick your brain? What are your thoughts? My contact that got me in, and at the time, he was at the VP of the league office, but now he's at Carolina, and my husband met him at a cigar event, and brought home his business card to me. My husband told him, yeah, my wife really wants to do this. And he brought his card to me, and when I saw the NFL emblem, I was like, oh my God, thank you. And I was like, yes, your cigar events paid off for something. That wasn't just for you, but, and I literally just reached out. He could have said no, and he said yes, and we met at Starbucks, and I literally just connect with people, and that's part of like the advocacy that we have to do for ourselves and for our field, is connect with people that are in completely different organizations. Even if you just have an interest or an inkling in it, like just reach outside of the box. Like the worst someone can do is say no or not respond. And I think ever since since I got in this role, I have gotten a lot of requests, like about a dozen a week. And I try to answer as many as I can. I cannot get to them all, and I have forgiven myself for that. But I do, and I always respond, even if it might be a little late, but I'll respond. And even my way of trying to connect people and just educate people or who just want to kind of hear my story and my path. I do a Q&A once a month. Like that's kind of all I can do. I don't have the time or the capacity to have a lot of one-on-one conversations. So I was like, well, Tish, you don't want to just dismiss everyone. You still kind of about educating people. So I was like, how can I do this in something that works better for my time and my sanity, and still kind of give back. So I have a Q&A once a month where people can kind of call in. They have to message me first, and give me their email address, and I'll send them the conference line. They call in. I do it 1 hour a month. And because everyone's pretty much asking me a lot of the same questions, and so when I first started, I tried to do a lot of those one-on-one conversations, and people would do, let me add this, yeah. People would do things that I felt were unprofessional when you're asking for my help. So be mindful of that, just professionalism when you go into the field. If you're asking for someone else's help and time, you don't continually inconvenience them. So that was happening, I would say, yes, great, I'd love to have a one-on-one conversation with you. Feel free to pick my brain. We can kind of talk through some things. And they'd be like, okay, great. I schedule a time, and they'll say, this literally just happened last week. And they say, okay, cool, that time works. And then they cancel, oh, I'm sorry, that doesn't work for me. Can we reschedule? You know what, something came up. Cool, no problem. I'll give you one reschedule. And then I did that. And then the day before we were supposed to have our conversation, she emails me again, and she's like, oh my gosh, that still won't work for me. This doesn't work for her schedule, this doesn't work for mine. I was like, in my mind, like, you do know I have a whole lot going on right now. Like, I have a whole schedule, and I didn't respond. Like, that was it. Like, you got your 2 chances. I try to work with you. So when you're seeking someone else's help, and this is just, professional courtesy. When you're seeking knowledge or you're seeking assistance from someone else, be mindful that their time is valuable as well. And it's not like, like I never want to be dismissive to someone, but there's a limit. And even I get a lot of LinkedIn requests, and someone even DM'd me in like Instagram, and she was like, oh my gosh, I would love to connect with you. I am a neuroscientist. She was a neuroscientist, I guess, apparently in some other state, and she was like, we could be like yin and yang, we could work together. Like she said yin and yang. I was like, this is very presumptuous of you. And number one, this is not a professional setting, this is Instagram. And I just feel like a neuroscientist should not slide in my DMs. I just felt like it was unprofessional, but I don't know if it's, the generation, I don't know what it is. But, just when you're seeking, connections, be mindful about how you present yourself. Be mindful of the platform that, that you're in, because it means something. And be mindful of, the time that you're requesting, and honor it. So if someone says, hey, I'm going to meet you for coffee, and I've got 30 minutes, be there 10 minutes, 15 minutes early, and don't take any more than 30 minutes. It is not to say that their time is any more valuable than yours, but it is to say that you need to be respectful of everyone's time. And so for that group of people, and they were social workers too, that were messaging me, and I hated not to respond, but I was like, lady, you have reached the end of the line with me. And because I recognized when I was trying, when I first started, I was trying to please everyone. I was trying to answer everyone's questions and set up those meetings. It was really starting to mess with me because I would schedule things out, so I could get to everyone, and then they cancel, and then they need to reschedule, and then I gotta go back, and I was like, I'm not doing this, so that's what kind of started the Q&A, 1 hour a month. That's what everyone can kind of get from me. And so, but they won't even get another email, and I hate to do that because they were social workers, but you've got to learn to be professional.
She might have learned. You
Yeah,
might have taught her.
Yeah, I was like, I hope and she sent me an email, and she was like, so, God, we got to reschedule again. This was the third time. And she was like, hey, would you mind? I can update the calendar. All I did was go to the invite that she sent me, and I just hit decline. There's no response. There's nothing else for me to say. Like, we tried. I wish you the best of luck, my dear. Good luck to you. But yeah, so reach out to people and don't be afraid. Like I said, people have said no to me plenty of times. Like I said, when I was at Atrium, I got an offer 36 jobs within a very short amount of time. So you're gonna get no's. You're gonna get people that don't respond. Even the coaches, when Coach Ron spoke at the Women in Sports Forum during Combine, and he mentioned that. He was like, reach out to me. And people look like, you really, well, it's okay for us to like email? He was like, yeah. He was like, now, I may respond late. If I respond, if I don't respond, reach out a second time. So don't be afraid of no. Don't be afraid of the rejection. But also seek opportunities and seek knowledge from people that can teach you something. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, thank you guys.
Thank you, Tish.
So, wait.
It's quick, it ain't got nothing to do
sorry.
with social work, but if they win and they get a ring, you get one too?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, yeah. I want a ring. I want a ring. I hope we get one. Yeah, and I actually spoke to a clinician with the Patriots, and I asked him because he's like, yeah, he got a ring too. So that's kind of working out. I might have to pay for it a little bit, but still, yeah, it's offered. So yes, but thank you all so much for having me.